Welcome to Therapy, Tech, and Takeout, where humor meets healing with bite-sized chunks of wisdom and techie tips. I'm Toni Teixeira. I am a therapist, entrepreneur, recovering overthinker, and a bit of an ethics nerd. And I'm joined by...
Hi, and I'm Jackie Toll. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an unapologetic spreadsheet addict and a low rent stand up comedian. So, hey, Tony, how's it
Hey,
going?
hey, Jackie.
What you vibing on this week?
It's going great. What am I vibing on? I'm moving from one project to empty space before another project, and I'm not quite sure what that looks like out in the distance. So I'm really vibing on some peace, calm, quiet, reading some fiction,
I love it.
and just like kind of being like a few days I slept in a little bit late and really just enjoying some peace and calm, especially like coming off of the holiday season and coming off of a really big project.
I bet.
So, kind of reveling in the possibilities, which I really love and is very different from me because I'm always like I'm on to the next project usually.
Yeah,
And so I'm experiencing something new, which is like, wow, the possibility of not knowing or having a lot of possibilities out there. Where do I want to put my energy next? So it's really a cool time that I'm enjoying.
absolutely. Oh, I'm so
How
happy
about
for you.
thank you. What's happening in your world?
Well, like lots of good and busy things with work, but I would say the thing that is bringing me a lot of joy lately is Pluribus. Have you watched any of this?
I can't believe you said this. My daughter texted me about an hour ago and said that, Mom, you and my husband, you guys have to watch this show. Me and my roommates just finished watching it and we loved it and you're gonna love it. Lots of exclamation points. I know nothing about it. So I'm like, okay, I'm in.
Yay!
I want to hear about it.
It's a hard one to describe, but like it has an interesting perspective on the concept of like the hive mind, I would say,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and just perhaps, that like individuality versus being part of the group and things like that. I think it's by the same guy who did Breaking Bad.
Breaking Bad. That's what my
Yeah.
daughter said. Yeah, but
And
she said,
the
but it's
woman was
not
in
like it, really.
no, it's
Okay.
totally different. But the woman was in Better Call Saul, which was a sequel or prequel, I guess, to Breaking Bad. So it was interesting to see her in this other role too. But yeah, a phenomenal show. I'm enjoying the heck out of it.
Which actress? The one who's Saul's girlfriend in Better
Yeah,
Call?
yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
loved her in there. So it was great to see her in another big role and leading the way this time. So fun.
I can't wait to watch it. And it's such a coincidence that you mentioned it today when I got this
Right?
message from my daughter. Yeah, this has happened a few times, Jackie, these
I swear I'm not reading
coincidences.
your messages.
So, like today, we have, this topic that I think we talk about a lot
Yeah,
about like how digital media affects us, how technology affects us. And there's like this kind of, I think, long-standing assumption that it's bad for us and it's especially bad for teenagers that social media and gaming I think if you asked anyone on the street, including people who have lots of education and therapists, and probably myself not that long ago would have said, yeah, that like has an effect. I think we're seeing a mental health crisis. I think we're seeing higher numbers of mental health disorders in teenagers. And
absolutely.
what correlates with that? Oh, gee, and there's this surge in social media. So it's very easy to make that assumption. But without research, and I'm a research nerd as well, we can't really say that one thing is causing another. Yes, they're correlated, but we don't know for sure if, using social media and gaming is actually causing this mental health crisis. I could see how the assumption would be
For
there. It
sure.
makes some sense maybe to say that. But this research, which I think was a meta-analysis. There was this research by University of Manchester in England where they did a 3-year study, preteens and teens from 11 to 14. They studied them over 3 years' time, school years. And I think they collected a lot of data. And I think this was a meta-analysis. I think they came back and looked at the data from a different lens to look at this relationship between social media use and mental health disorders. They called it internalizing symptoms. And the internalizing symptoms were symptoms of anxiety. And took a look at whether or not what that relationship looked like. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was interesting too, because I remember back, when we were younger and Columbine was like such a massive, part of the zeitgeist and tragedy, and video games were something that, violent video games. And again, it was one of these things where it made logical, or, it made sense like on the surface that these things, you know, you're doing violent things in this video game. No wonder you're out doing violent things. But, over time, the research, I think, came back and said that wasn't the case either. And so it's interesting to see it with social media, because you do think, like, especially with all the body image things and that stuff on social media, that there's got to be something it's doing. But I think this kind of makes you reframe and say, okay, well, perhaps it's like watching TV, or like in moderation, and with proper guidelines and
Yeah.
whatnot, like used responsibly, it's not
Yeah.
necessarily causing these things.
Right. And I don't think it's a bad message to talk about using social media and digital technology and gaming responsibly. What's interesting is that in this study, there really was no evidence that showed causation, that social media and gaming use caused an increase in depression and anxiety in this age group of preteens and teens. And they had an N of 25,000.
Right.
So we're not talking
Huge.
about, it's huge, 25,000,
Right.
which makes it feel like a really robust study. We're not talking
For
about
sure.
anecdotal evidence here. It really
And they
implies that the social media and gaming are not causing these mental health difficulties. In fact, it might be even suggesting that kids are turning to gaming and social media as a way to cope with some of the mental health issues that they may be experiencing.
was a really interesting point. It was that the emotions were the leading indicator, that impacted usage of these things, and not necessarily the other way around, which I thought was interesting, because they said even in some populations they would see, when kids were reporting that they were anxious or depressed, they would actually see decreases in the usage of social media and gaming. They couldn't tell if it was because the parents were noticing a problem with their kid and restricting the usage, or if it was sort of that normal, I'm depressed and I'm losing interest in the things that used to interest me
Right.
sort of thing.
That's what I loved about this study. I really feel there was a lot of transparency. I mean, one of the things I read the article and then I read the actual study, because
Of
that's
course
what
you
I do.
did.
Of course I did. And I really wanted to see, was this, now there was a lot of data and analyses that absolutely went over my head. I haven't done this kind of work in many, many years. And I really was looking for, are there any holes? Are there any gaps? What were they using to really make this
Yeah,
determination? And I thought there's like really a lot of transparency and looking at what the parents' influence might be on this, considering the signs of depression that adolescents might actually be pulling back from usage, because that's what you would do if you were feeling anxious or depressed. You might get more withdrawn and
absolutely.
least likely to use that. Yeah.
And interesting too, then perhaps it might not necessarily be appropriate as a response to, I'm noticing my kid is anxious and or depressed, to restrict those things, because if they're not having, you might be you might be punishing them perhaps more than you're protecting them or helping them. Perhaps. Again, I think parents need
Perhaps.
to really notice their very specific,
Yeah.
use cases. But it's an interesting, at least, thought exercise for people to have, for sure.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. If your adolescent is feeling depressed, to really look at the big picture, it's not necessarily social media. It's really easy to blame social media, and that may be what parents do, not because they're lazy, but because it just feels like, oh, it must be that, when that's really what a lot of people are talking about. That is what's in the zeitgeist. we're
Absolutely.
we're looking at that. I mean, even look at our podcast. I think that we came together making an assumption that there is an effect, that technology is having an effect on the population, on development, on individuals, and it might not be so positive. Let's take a look at it. That's really why we started this, and why we're going in this direction. So it's really interesting
Absolutely.
to see that it's a much more complicated relationship than maybe we thought. Yeah. So spending time on social media or gaming doesn't necessarily lead to mental health problems. And
Right?
it also didn't matter whether people were active or passive, which was interesting. The
I thought that was
scrolling,
interesting too. Yeah. I would have thought scrolling would be worse than active.
yeah, yeah, me too. Me too.
I
Yeah, go
think
ahead.
the other important thing that it sort of made me think about is, what are the main drivers of teen anxiety, that parents should be thinking about? Because I think if mentally, as a parent myself, if you
Yeah,
can be like, it's social media, then maybe you're not paying attention to some other
yeah.
things, like
Well,
academic pressures.
that good point, because one of the things that this study made a point of talking about is digital technology itself could be problematic because kids use it to bully each other.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
there's another layer. So this really specifically looked at scrolling on social media and interacting with it, and gaming, not the other pieces of it. I mean, even in gaming where you're talking to other people, there could be bullying, and there
Oh,
could
for
be,
sure.
interpersonal stuff going on there. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think it's really important to make that distinction. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be careful about
Right.
social media, because it is how it is being used that's important. But it's really about the big picture for teens and young children too. What do their lives really look like? What are the influences in those lives? How positive are they? And how is that affecting, each individual child? Because each kid is unique. And
Absolutely.
what might be feel harmful or shameful to one child might not feel that way to another. So you really have to know your kid, and you really have to know what their lives are like. And I wonder, Jackie, if parents really feel in touch these days with their kids' lives with all these layers of social media and digital technology. Does it kind of make for more distance? Is it harder to get close to your kid when they're sitting there, kind of scrolling on their phone?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it does. I think it makes it, at least for me, it did. I'm guessing because like there was less. I think when there's more things to distract yourself with, like there's less like forced, like boring time, right? And I think that boring time is really when a lot of those relationships and that bonding happens. And so I think you have to then get intentional about it. And that can be
Yeah.
hard with kids that
Hmm.
don't want to necessarily put their phone down and, or, go on a long car ride somewhere or whatever, and be engaged in something. But I think it is important. And I think it's important to think about what stresses am I putting on my kid as well, right? Because as
Right.
parents, we do.
We do. We
And
do.
some of that's good, right? Like some of that's important. There's a reason behind some of it. And then some of it maybe isn't necessarily the right thing for that kid. And, being able to have an honest conversation and reflection with yourself or perhaps, a partner or whatever on, what's really going on here, I think is important too.
Bring up some really important points about just relationships, and that social media could get in the way, technology could get in the way of developing those relationships. And I think it's a little bit different now than when you and I had our babies. When our kids were little, we didn't have the iPad to say, kind of here you go. And I imagine it's really hard on parents today to
Yeah.
find time to really take care of everything that they need to take care of. It really is very easy to, I guess, hand a kid an iPad, and like, so that you could step
Right.
away for a
Or have
few
a
minutes
conversation or, yeah.
versus having a conversation, which takes time. The intention is good. I don't think parents are trying to avoid their children, but the
No.
technology is really easy to use and could be really helpful for parents who are under a lot of stress
Yeah.
to make some time for
I
themselves.
mean, if you think about it, is it really all that different than like TV was?
Good point. Yes.
You know, I guess the idea that it's everywhere, right?
Well, it's
Like
more
it's the thing
portable
that's
now.
different. Yeah.
Like, we
Like
would go to
you
a
couldn't go to a
restaurant.
restaurant.
Exactly. I was thinking about that, right? We didn't have an iPad to give the kids. Maybe we get brick. I used to bring toys and coloring books. How
Heck yeah.
different is that? I don't know.
Right? Not a lot different. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think, that yeah, it's an easy shortcut to, and then for parents to internalize the guilt, right? Of like, oh, like I've allowed my kid to do this and now that's why. And so I think that another nice thing about this study is it kind of can help people reframe their own guilt around leveraging the tool that can be that
Right.
distraction.
I love that. And that's what made me really happy about this because I talk to parents all day about this kind of topic, about how
Yeah.
they're interacting with the kids, how guilty they feel about what they are and what they're not doing. And that has a big impact on how we parent our kids. If we're
Huge.
walking around with a lot of guilt about what we're doing and what we think we should be doing or supposed to be doing, that has a big impact. So I feel like that it takes some of that burden away,
Mhm.
um, and also allows parents to really put the, um, kind of choices back in their hand. If this doesn't have as big an impact as we think it is, as we think it does, that means we have a big impact. And
Right?
there's some good things that we can do. One, I really think is paying attention to kids' lives and really learning more about what experiences our kids are having on a day-to-day
Absolutely.
basis.
No, I think so. And I think the idea too that perhaps you can like maybe noticing the changes in social media usage, like you would notice the changes in hanging out with their friends and
Yeah.
stuff, might be a bellwether, not necessarily a thing to celebrate, like you might have thought, right? Oh, yay, my kid is at least, they might not be like, running around happy, but at least they're not on social media all the time. You might think you're winning and you're, you're not. And so I think that that's
Good
another
point.
helpful perspective from the article for sure.
Yeah. So while you're looking at the experiences in kids' lives, like looking at what's changing is really important, whether it's social media usage, whether or not they're hanging out with their friends or they're still doing their activities. It all matters and it can all indicate that that something's going on. I mean, this kind of leans us into just the topic of this mental health crisis for adolescents. And you and I are not going to solve that today. But it's a
It would
really
be
big
nice,
would be nice, right? It
right?
it 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 is a really big issue, and if it's not social media that's causing it, need to be aware of what the signs are that something's going on so that we can intervene sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. And I wonder, I know this isn't 100% on topic, but I read an article this past week about youth in Russia and that youth crimes and violence is up over 18% year over year in the youth population there. And they were hypothesizing or what in this article that, perhaps that has to do with what their environment is like, what their
Yeah.
worldview is like, and what their options for the future look like.
Mm,
And that might be perhaps driving some of that. And that really struck home as one, very sad, and
yeah.
two, perhaps there's part of that here, right? I mean, not as extreme, but they see sort of the group of kids I don't know if it's really a generation ahead of them, but like that are our kids' age. And a
Mhm.
lot of them are not thriving necessarily, like work is harder to come by. People are living at home longer. Like this,
Mhm.
like going out and being on your own and independent and adult is sort of something that's becoming less and less attainable. And I think there's something meaningful in that place that we're in as a society. And again, it's not everybody, but I think it's affecting enough people that the kids are feeling it on a level that maybe they're not
Mhm.
even noticing. And that could be causing some real societal strain on the population
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
And so the more we can do, I think, to show kids like a good future and, that there are opportunities and that we can reframe, being an adult doesn't necessarily mean all of these things, as long as you're happy and productive and living the life that you want to the
Yeah.
extent that you can, like, that's great, right? I think that's a
Right.
win. That's a huge
Right.
win.
Right. It's so hard though when adults are struggling.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I do what I do is because I want to affect the generation that's raising kids so the next generation can have it a little bit easier because so many parents, are struggling with their past and then with their present
Yeah.
economy, society, all the things, all the strains. So I think you're right that like we pass that stuff. There's intergenerational trauma and
Hmm.
some of it is trauma that's happening right now for people
Yeah.
and that pressure gets passed on. Think that I was thinking I was reading a book that was talking about kind of 18th century society and the 13-year-old is out to work, works at a printer's
Smoking a
and
pack a day.
I was thinking, oh yeah, this is my train of thought. Yeah, in the past, kids had to grow up really quickly. And then I paused and I'm like, wait a second, our kids are growing up really quickly too. They might not be working in a factory
Right.
somewhere, but the expectation and the pressure of parents that they pick the right preschool for their kids so they can get into a certain college,
Right.
you know, kids can feel that and they can feel
Yeah,
the pressure. What internship do I need? What do I need to do in high school to be able to get into
for
college?
sure.
So there's a lot of pressure, or the message that if you don't get into college, what are you going to do with your life?
Right.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting that you mentioned intergenerational trauma. I'm a huge fan of the great courses. I don't know if you've ever gotten into any
yeah,
of them,
I've heard of them.
but there's one on stress and your body. And they talk a lot about intergenerational trauma and stress and how, like, people who went the children of people who went through the Great Depression or other like famine type events have like different like metabolic processes that like arose from like that sustained. And like, that's just like one example, but a physiological one. I always find that stuff so interesting. So I love that you brought that up. But this was
There,
such an interesting topic for
this
sure.
this was an interesting topic. Now, I still have that question mark though in my mind, Jackie. I don't know if you do too, about even though there's not this connection, of being on the social media and the gaming directly, like kind of the amount of time that these tech habits are not driving the mental health difficulties, I still have that like kind of feeling about the things that are shared and how that's seeping into our society because we are talking about like okay, the rest of society, is might be having that impact, that mental health impact on our kids and ourselves. What are the things that are in our zeitgeist or in our like kind of everyday expectations that might be there? I can go with, okay, being more on social media and scrolling is not necessarily going to increase mental health difficulties, but I'm not completely, totally convinced that the messages that we're getting are having an impact. And some of
Oh,
them
for
do come
sure.
from, some of them do come from social media. Some of those expectations do come from that. So I'm willing to say, okay, got 25,000 kids in this study. That time didn't have an impact on their what they called internalized symptoms of anxiety and depression. But what is being shared and how is that kind of affecting our society as a whole? So it's something to think about because I hear every day, people who just say everybody else is happy and I'm not,
Yeah.
instead of the understanding there's the human condition is, I almost want to say we're all miserable. No, we're all struggling. We are all having, problems and issues, and it's not just you. It's not just you.
Absolutely. It is not just you, it is all of us.
Yeah.
For
So
sure.
and there's not very many messages like that. There's this one woman I love. I just saw on social media. It was she called herself a influencer, and she basically says you don't need anything on Amazon today. You don't need to buy anything today. You're okay.
Say
You're
it again,
enough.
Tony.
You're enough just the way you are. And I love that. That's one, little tiny Who voice
Absolutely.
in Whoville, kind of shouting, "Hey, you're good enough. You're okay. You don't really need to buy that thing to feel better about yourself." So that's great.
I love that. And I'll match your social media thing with one that I saw my daughter sent me. And it was this woman, and she was talking about this charity that she started because somebody, in her community had posted asking for recommendations for cleaning services because she was postpartum and she had gotten depressed. And her house was kind of like a hoarding situation, and she was ready to get out of it, and she needed somebody to help her. And
Mhm.
people were sending in their recommendations for cleaning services. And she's like, aren't we the village? Like, can't we go help this woman? And she put a group of people together, and they went and they helped clean this woman's house, and they cooked her meals. And they thought, can't we do this for other people? And they started doing it all over the country.
Wow.
Right.
Wow,
And
that's
so just that idea
beautiful.
too, that like we are the village and we can show up for each other. And I think that's how we do our best to stay on top of this and protect the people that we at least have the opportunity to interact with.
Well said, Jackie. Let's leave it on that note.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Toni. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast. And we're excited to talk to you guys next week.
Let's put both articles in the show notes too.
Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. All right, great.
Awesome. All right.
Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.